Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. If you missed part one, well, you don't have to go back and watch it now, but it explains it was why it's just me here and there's no Tim, because Tim's on holidays and the Q&A series must go ahead, I guess. So I'm doing it by myself. Let's get into it. Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new Duranaut High Performance Thermal Paste. Duranaut offers extreme long-term stability combined with outstanding thermal conductivity, and this has been achieved through a specially engineered silicon oil combined with aluminium microparticles and zinc oxide nanoparticles of various shapes. Duranaut isn't electrically conductive and won't harden over time. For best performance, you'll want to apply a very thin layer, and to help with this, included is the TG Spatula Pro. The spatula's revised design allows for increased pressure during application, making it easy to spread a thin, even layer of Duranaut. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Alrighty, was there ever an update, or any update, on the Intel 13th and 14th gen CPUs? Was it ever confirmed that all the stability and degradation issues were completely fixed? Intel had claimed that it was fixed, but it's really impossible to say at this point in time whether that's true or not, given that it does take quite a reasonable period of time for the degradation to occur and then, the stability problems and all that to kick in. So I don't know is the answer, and I don't think anyone really knows at this point in time. Having said that, though, there have been some reports, I think it was from the Firefox devs, that they were seeing a lot of crashing from 13th and 14th gen CPUs. So their crash logs showed a clear link between hot regions and Intel CPU failures. So that was an interesting report that happened earlier in the year. So the devs confirmed that the issue is 100% an Intel problem, adding that a significant portion of the crashes were coming from machines powered by the popular Core i7-14700K. So that's interesting. Now, it's possible that people that are seeing these crashing issues and that sort of stuff either aren't aware of the degradation and stability issues that the LGA 1700 platform faces and therefore haven't updated their BIOS. So the BIOS versions that were killing the processors slowly is still doing that. That's probably a highly likely scenario. But again, it doesn't really confirm or deny if the fix is a fix or not. So yeah, it's one of the reasons why, well, not that we were really recommending those CPUs anyway, because I feel like there are better CPUs available on the market. So not really a big deal. Wasn't recommending a 14700K, and I still don't recommend a 14700K. So that's covers us on the review side of things. But as far as for those of you who have them, is the problem solved or not? I don't know. I'm sorry. Alrighty, we've got a bit of a long one here. You guys really don't like the RTX 5070 because of the 12GB of VRAM. Yeah, okay. 12GB seems just right on the edge when using ultra settings at 1440p. I feel like ultra settings are usually a waste of performance/VRAM, okay? Because most of the time there is almost no difference between high and ultra. With the availability of cards and AMD price issues in a lot of regions, I feel like it's becoming almost the best option in that price range. Would you do a re-review on it with current pricing? Well, the current pricing, at least to my knowledge, for the RTX 5070 is $550 US, which, I still feel is a bit rich for a 12GB graphics card in what is now late 2025. That does seem absolutely crazy to me. The RX 9070, that's currently $600 over on Newegg, so I really don't think anything that I've said in my previous reviews or updated, we do GPU updated pricing videos all the time, but I don't think any of that changes, and therefore I don't really think a re-review would be warranted. It's probably just going to be a waste of time. If just 9% more, I'd be getting the RX 9070. I think I can say that for sure. So, less than a 10% premium, I'd be getting the RX 9070. Especially with the XT version overpriced. Normally I would recommend the 9070 XT, but that's pretty overpriced at the moment. It's like $700 US or more over in the US, of course. Other regions do differ. For example, here in Australia, you're looking at $1,000 Australian for an RTX 5070 or $1,080 for the RX 9070. So that's a mere 8% premium for the 9070. So I would get the 9070 out of those two, but I wouldn't actually get either of those. I would get the 9070 XT as it's just 1,150 Australian dollars. And that's just 6% more than the non-XT model. And if we look at my testing, the 9070 XT was on average 13% faster than the RTX 5070 at 1440p, and then 23% faster at 4K. Here in Australia, it costs 15% more, has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, so I'd recommend fellow Aussies buy the 9070 XT. All right, one from our Discord member here, Ibslice. Making an older computer new again, sprucing it up, he reckons. I'm running an older... Oh, if... He's not putting words in his mouth. If running an older AMD R7 2700 or R5 3600 or Intel equivalent, is it really worth upgrading to a new platform, such as a new motherboard, CPU, and RAM, so the full package? If primarily gaming, would a better GPU upgrade be sufficient? So I guess he's saying if you're running a GTX 1080 Ti, RX 580, Vega 56, RTX 2080 Ti, for example, so probably up to an RTX 2080 Ti, is it worth just upgrading your GPU and keeping your older equivalent to 2700 or 3600 Ryzen CPU? Sort of a difficult question to answer because it does depend on... Not wearing it depends. But yeah, for those of you with AM4 systems, if you can get an X3D CPU on the cheap, then that's a great upgrade, I think is the word they use. That is a great upgrade option. Super cost effective, or it can be. Unfortunately, the boat's kind of sailed on that one. I think 5800 X3Ds are pretty terribly priced now, and I think they've also ended the production run of the 5700 X3D, so probably hard to get one of those now, pricings, yeah. So I think AM4's kind of had its time in the sun there. So yeah, you've probably missed out, which is not what you want to hear if you're an AM4 owner. You could probably look to the second-hand market, but I expect prices of those CPUs now that the production run's over to start creeping up. Now, if you have an older GPU, even if it is, say, an RTX 2080 Ti, which, if I'm right, that is generally just a little bit slower than the new RTX 5060, but of course it has more VRAM. So let's say if you had an RX 580 or Vega 56, I think at that point you really are just looking at an entirely new PC. I don't think it's worth, because of the situation with AM4 or those older Intel platforms, because they're in the same boat really now with the X3D CPUs going kaput. I think, yeah, with a system that old, you're really looking at, something new, like off the top of my head, like a good budget combo is like a Ryzen 5 7600 with a 9060 XT 16GB. Something like that would be the way to go, which is an entirely new PC, a couple of $1,000s there. Alrighty, we'll move along. With all the recent chatter around CU DIMMs, how much would the added bandwidth aid a GPU running out of VRAM and then paging to system RAM? In the case of the 9060 XT 8GB, which has the full PCIe times 16, that should be able to benefit, but how much? I wouldn't expect someone buying a $300 GPU to go with expensive memory modules, but it would be interesting. So I guess it's kind of like a for science question, because yeah, absolutely, CUDIM modules aren't going to save GPUs with not enough VRAM. Can help though, faster system memory. But yeah, in this specific example, the answer is like not really or not at all, because even when using PCI Express 5.0 with all 16 lanes available, you're looking at a total bandwidth of 64 gigabytes per second. And then because PCI Express is bidirectional, that's just 32 gigabytes in a single direction. So you've essentially got 32 gigabytes of bandwidth to access the memory. So as long as you have a system with memory that can read write at 32 gigabytes per second, then the system memory, so the RAM, that won't be your primary bottleneck. And like in this example, a dual channel DDR5 8200 memory, you're looking at a bandwidth of 130 gigabytes per second, something like that. Peak theoretical bandwidth is something like that. So that is significantly higher than the PCIe bandwidth. So again, system memory won't be the limiting factor, and that'll be pretty much true for all DDR5 and probably most DDR4 systems. I know you guys sometimes tell us about CPU and GPU sales based on what you hear from retailers, but do you have any insight into pre-built sales at all? I think that Nvidia's stranglehold on the PC market is likely because they're the default GPU on pre-built systems. But it would be nice to have some behind-the-scenes info to back it up. I don't really have any direct insight into that, but Nvidia dominate retail sales as well. Like they, at least when they've got stock, they do, and certainly on a global scale. You might see some preferences in certain regions, but at a global scale, Nvidia dominates everything. So I don't necessarily think it's the pre-builts that are giving them. I mean, it's definitely giving them an advantage. I would say AMD does better probably in the retail sector for direct sales, direct consumer sales, than they do for, system integrators and all that sort of stuff. As I said, I don't really have any insight into that. So Nvidia is probably more dominant there, but it's not like they don't dominate retail sales. So, AMD just has to do better. This generation's been promising. They've done better for the first time in a long time. They just need to keep it up now. Crystal ball time. Tim's not here, and his crystal ball's not here either, so I'm just going to have to wing it. As Zen 6 will reportedly have 12 cores per CCD, that'd be pretty cool. Will AMD still offer 8-core X3D chips? And not like the 6-core ones that have low availability on Zen 4, but I guess will they have wide availability? With consoles still offering just 8 cores, and consoles typically being the baseline for developers, I don't see games scaling beyond 8. Well, lots of games do scale beyond 8 cores, but anyway, if they still offer 144 megabytes of L3, it could offer a game monster. Well, yeah, crystal ball time. We're working under quite a few assumptions here. So if they do have, if 12 cores is your standard CCD configuration, I think they would prioritize that part to have, the X3D cache. But, this question does depend entirely on yields. That's pretty much it. So how good are the yields for the 12-core CCDs? And then when they're coupling that with the extra 3DV cache, how does that all work out? Not sure. Yields. Do you think the 50% increase in VRAM amount promised by the leaked RTX 50 Super cards will be enough to alleviate concerns about the amount of VRAM in modern GPUs for the foreseeable future? Yes, on the super models, because you're getting 18 gigabytes on an RTX 5070 and then 24 gigabytes on the 5070 Ti Super and then 24 gigabytes on the 5080 Super. So I think those higher end cards, 24 gigabytes is probably going to be sufficient for the foreseeable future when you're, because once you go enabling things like if you want to turn frame generation on, maybe path tracing, ray tracing, all that sort of stuff, that will eat up the extra RAM over your standard like ultra preset, let's say. And we're seeing that 16 gigabytes in some of those instances, especially at 4K, even with upscaling, getting pretty close. So I think a couple of years down the track, you will start running into issues, which you don't really want to have to do when you spend $1,000 or thereabouts on a graphics card. It's a very welcomed upgrade, I would say, to the RTX 5070. Now, pricing, we need to know what the pricing is before we can get too excited about an 18 gigabyte RTX 5070. But of course, the cards that really need the VRAM boosts at those lower price points of, $300, for example, have 8 gigabytes of VRAM. They really need 12 at an absolute minimum, but ideally, 16 gigabytes is probably what should be the minimum at this point in time. But yeah, getting more VRAM is going to help. I just don't think it's really helping the cards that are in most need. Apart from, the RTX 5070, because 12 gigabytes there is pretty lame at $550 US. All right. To what degree do you think people being more accepting of frame gen now is caused by Nvidia no longer being the only one pushing for it? And there's a second question here. Do you think AMD and Nvidia are regretting or will soon come to regret offering 8 and 16 gigabyte models of the same GPU? So as for people accepting frame generation, I don't really have much insight there. Like, are people more excited? And it seemed to me that initially people were really excited and accepting of frame generation when they thought it was like an instant turn on more performance button. And then when Tim demonstrated that it's more of a frame smoothing technology and the hype started to evaporate, that's when people were sort of probably, I guess, angry and annoyed that frame generation wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And, the window of usefulness is quite small. I think now there was some media that didn't quite I don't want to say cotton on as quickly, but had a differing opinion. I think now pretty much everyone's on the same page that frame generation is considered to be more of a frame smoothing technology, and it also has a more narrow window, especially on the lower end cards where you would enable it and where it's useful. It's one of those technologies where if you're already getting hundreds of frames per second, then yeah, turn it on. It's extra smooth and you don't notice the latency penalty and all that sort of stuff. And you can take advantage of super high refresh rate monitors. But if you're gaming at 30 FPS, turning on frame generation is not a fun time. It doesn't just boost you up to 60, which is where it would be most useful. So I think that's why people were annoyed with it. And whether that opinion has changed, I'm not really sure. I haven't seen people warm to it that much. And it's been weaponized. I think that's probably why people still, we don't think frame generation is a bad technology. As I said, it's got its place. There are benefits to it, but it's not what we were sold, just like ray tracing initially and DLSS upscaling initially. And they continue to weaponize it to say, 50, 70, beat 40, 90, all that kind of nonsense. So yeah, I guess that's what I've got to say about the frame gen part. And then as for, are they regretting or will they come to regret offering 8 and 16 gigabyte models with the same GPU? That's a win-win for them. Really, the reason why we've pushed back against this and tried to educate gamers on the perils of 8 gigabyte GPUs is because if they keep buying them, AMD and Nvidia are more than happy to keep serving you GPUs that will run into performance issues and force you either to upgrade sooner than you would or spend more money than you would have liked to. So yeah, I don't know why they would regret it. If even with the RTX 5070 12 gigabyte, Nvidia would love nothing more than that card to be an absolute unusable piece of crap by the time their next generation comes along. Because it means like what happened with a lot of RTX 3070 owners, that they upgrade. And they usually, by that stage, they've been educated and they know, I only had 12 gigabytes of VRAM. I want to use all these features and games are more demanding. I need a card with at least 16 or 20 or whatever it is. And they look up and they're like, oh, okay. I have to get a 5070 Ti this time. I can't just get the 5070. So I've got to spend closer to $1,000 US. So yeah, I don't know, what angle you were shooting at there for them regretting it. But really, the VRAM thing is a win-win for both AMD and Nvidia. So that's why we've been calling it an anti-consumer trap for so long now, because it doesn't benefit you guys at all. I don't know why anyone defends it, because it's a benefit to no one other than AMD, Nvidia, and probably their shareholders, because you're going to give them more money sooner rather than later. All right. Do you still think it's worth buying a new old gen GPU right now? In my region, the RX 7800 XT is roughly the same price or cheaper than the 9060 XT, 16 gigabyte, of course, and it has better rasterization performance. So in my testing, I believe the 7800 XT was an average roughly 20% faster, probably just a little bit shy of that than the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. So yeah, as you say, that's a decent margin there for rasterization. But the 7800 XT is limited to FSR 3, which isn't particularly great, certainly not compared to the newer versions of upscaling. And then, of course, the 9060 XT does support FSR 4, which is considerably better. And I would say much closer to DLSS in terms of quality than AMD has ever been before when comparing those upscaling technologies. So I think in games that support FSR 4, you will close up that margin to the 7800 XT with the 9060 XT. And of course, when using ray tracing, the newer 9060 XT, that's much faster. I think it was like almost 30% faster on average in my ray tracing benchmarks. And again, FSR 4 will help it out a lot more there. You'll get similar performance gains, but just much better image quality. So personally, I'm still leaning towards the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte over the 7800 XT. And I think, like, this is just a hunch, don't take this with a grain of salt, but I think that we'll see that the 9060 XT will age better than the 7800 XT. Just, I think there's still a little bit to come with driver improvements and things like that. And of course, AMD always prioritize the newest stuff when it comes to driver optimization, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think I'd probably invest in a 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. It's certainly the best value, like more entry level, mid-range, whatever you want to call it, GPU at this point in time. All right, next question. Today I discovered that I'm 3 gens behind in CPU, so he's got a Ryzen 5 3600, and GPU, Radeon RX 5700 XT, 2 in PCIe, so PCIe 3.0, and 1 RAM, so DDR4. As I can still run games very well at enjoyable graphics levels, do you think the industry has slowed down massively in recent times? And would you say platform upgrades are worth the ever higher cost of people who are behind? So, yeah, is it worth spending a heap of money on a new motherboard, CPU, memory, all that sort of stuff? Well, first of all, I think it's fair to say that the industry has slowed down quite considerably, which, I guess is fine. It's not like they're not deliberately slowing down. There's, there's real reasons for the slowdown. And I think the issue isn't so much the slowdown itself, which, again, technical reasons for why that's happening. It's more that pricing has gone in the other direction. So we've seen more stagnation in terms of performance and what you're getting, but the price is still skyrocketing. So I think that's more the problem and why people are frustrated. As for your system, I'd say the older spec PC is certainly still usable, though for me personally, it would be far too slow to sort of drive the frame rates that I need for games like, really awesome, epic games like Fortnite. That wasn't even I didn't even mean that pun, but there you go. You got that for free. So I would upgrade, I would have upgraded long before, probably to something like a 5800 X3D when they were dropped below $300 US. I would have snapped that up. That's an awesome bargain. If you have a 3600, it's like, I think I found 70% improved gaming performance on average. So that's an insane uplift for less than $300 US. But yeah, that's sort of no more now. But yeah, to your point, if things were moving like they used to, you wouldn't be using a 6-year-old graphics card still. You probably wouldn't be able to, and be highly undesirable anyway. Okay, what do you think about GN's China and Nvidia documentary and Bloomberg's takedown of that video? This was one of the most upvoted questions, so I will have a crack at it. I found the documentary really interesting, though most of it pretty unsurprising, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, really still very cool reporting by Steve and the GN team, and great content they made there. Admittedly, though, I was only halfway through it when it was taken down, so I am yet to actually finish the video, and I don't want to watch it on someone else's channel. I'm just going to wait till it's back on the Gamers Nexus channel. That may be the case by the time you watch this Q&A section or Q&A session. Not sure, but I will finish it once it's back on the Gamers Nexus channel. I did watch the follow-up video that Steve made. I watched that thing in its entirety, so good job me. And it seems pretty obvious that Bloomberg were used to strike the video, almost certainly on behalf of Nvidia. That's my opinion, of course. I have no evidence of this, so I guess don't strike my video. But yeah, I thought the documentary was great. I love to see different tech-related content pop up like that from time to time. And yeah, the takedown was expected. Certainly shameless, but expected. What do you think of Gigabyte's B850M D3HP? I don't see it from your latest review. Yeah, I actually couldn't get that board. I tried to buy it at the time, which is probably over a month ago now, when I was trying to round up all the boards for my roundup. I just couldn't get it. So yeah, I think it is much worse looking at the specs than the DS3H, which I did feature. That has 8 power stages for the V-Core. But still was power limited by Gigabyte. It's a power limit you can't remove. The D3HP, I don't know if you guys can hear that rain. It's absolutely chucking it down now. Anyway, I'll proceed. That has just 5 power stages according to Gigabyte's website. So that'll be, I'd say, pretty heavily power limited. Therefore, I would just avoid it. I can actually buy the board now, though. It was 260 Australian dollars via the Gigabyte store on Amazon, so I might try and get it and do some testing anyway, but really, I think it's safe to say just avoid that board. Get one of the higher-end Gigabyte boards that I did test and recommended, or something like an MSI Pro B850M-A Wi-Fi. That was a pretty good board. MSI didn't have too many good ones, but that was a particularly good board, and it's like $40 more, so probably just get something like that. All right, next question here. I know Steve is rightfully sick of talking about CPU testing, but I genuinely don't understand why enabling ray tracing in games increases CPU load. I think I've never seen an explanation to that. To my understanding, the most intuitive thing would be that it only increased GPU load. Yeah, it's a been a tough one to demonstrate basically in the past, but the reason for this is pretty simple. The CPU has to prepare the environment for the GPU to make those complex ray calculations. And this process can be quite a significant overhead on the CPU's workload. It's sort of more of a per game basis, which is why it's not necessarily a universal truth. But when you switch on ray tracing, it doesn't just create more work for the GPU, but also the CPU, as you've noticed, because the CPU has to constantly update the bounding volume hierarchies, or BVHs for short. And this acts as like a guide. It tells the GPU which objects are near the path of the ray. And it's these data structures that are used by the GPU to perform the actual ray tracing calculations. So for the rays to be thrown out there, there is stuff that needs to be updated for the GPU to do all its GPU stuff. And that stuff has to be done by the CPU first. So step one, CPU does some basic processing that then sets the GPU up so it can do complex processing, I guess is probably the simplest way I can put it. But as you also note, because ray tracing is so extremely taxing on the GPU, the increased load that the CPU sees isn't always recognized, as most configurations will end up being GPU bound first. So although CPU utilization has crept up, it's not necessarily influencing the performance. Like the CPU is not becoming the primary bottleneck. And it's really in games like Spider-Man, where you can still achieve quite high frame rates with ray tracing enabled, is where you're going to notice the increased CPU load the most, because there is a potential that the CPU could have an impact on the overall performance. So that is to say you become CPU bound. But again, that's going to depend on the CPU you're using. But for other games, enabling ray tracing, if that pushes you down around 60 FPS, then the GPU is almost certainly going to end up being the primary performance bottleneck. And then any additional load on the CPU pretty well goes unnoticed unless you're looking closely at that CPU utilization statistic, which isn't always super accurate. GPU usage is quite an accurate statistic, but CPU usage can be very inaccurate. So I'd use it as a very, very rough guide. And just lastly, I should reiterate that the increased CPU load you may see with ray tracing enabled can vary significantly depending on the game and how the ray traced effects are implemented. So testing this sort of overhead issue should only really be done on a game-by-game basis. All right. Would you like to... No, I guess I'll answer it. So, question is, do you think a Linux-based system is more viable today as a daily driver? I, for one, am sick and tired of I think I messed that up. Anyway, I mean, you can always use a virtual machine to get around some incompatibilities. Yeah, I guess you could. I'm not really sure how well that works. Honestly, I have very little experience with Linux. Linux fans, please put down the pitchforks. Doesn't help your cause. If anything, it has the opposite effect. But seriously, I do try to avoid talking about Linux on the channel because, let's be honest, some Linux fans are a little bit insane, and I don't know that much about Linux, which makes them even more insane. But, I get it. I don't really like Windows either. I'd probably happily jump over to Linux in a heartbeat, once, of course, you can play Fortnite. So, a bit of a pain point there, but yeah, that's pretty much the only thing stopping me from jumping to Linux is the fact that you can't play all games just yet. So, gotta keep using Windows, I guess. But look, I certainly I agree with this comment that Linux is more viable today than it ever has been before. And look, Windows is probably more trash than it ever has been before. In fact, I think that's probably more certain. So that is helping gamers get more excited about the prospect of moving over to Linux. And look, I really do hope this is something that we can do soon. I would be more than happy to do all of our benchmarking on Linux and leave Windows behind, because Windows just continues to head in the wrong direction as far as I can tell. And as I said, Linux appears to be getting better and better. But yeah, I'm sure it won't be too long into the future where we'll do another Linux-focused video, dabble on that. But if you want more Linux-based content in the meantime, I'm sure you're aware of Level 1 Techs. Wendell does an awesome job over there, and I'm pretty sure he does a fair bit of Linux-based stuff. Admittedly, I haven't been over to the channel for a while now, but awesome guy. And Gear Seekers, Nick from Gear Seekers, I know for a fact that he does a lot of Linux testing because I've seen it, and he's compared sort of our benchmarks with his Linux testing in the past and stuff like that. So another great guy. Go check out Gear Seekers if you want more Linux goodness. Okay, that is going to do it for part 2. I'm not sure if there'll be a part 3. Actually, there probably will be a part 3 because you guys had some questions for Balin. He's actually at a wedding at the moment while I film this, so he's at a wedding having a good time. Tim's over in Europe, almost certainly having a good time. And I'm in the old Harbour Unboxed studio recording Q&As. Honestly, I think I'm having the most fun, so I'm grateful for that. But yeah, there'll be more to come, I think, because we'll get Balin on and he'll answer your questions. So thanks for those of you who asked Balin a question. We'll get to that shortly. Anyway, it's going to do it for this one. I'm your host, Steve, and I will hopefully see you next time.